Thank you, Matt, for starting recording. Good morning, everyone. I'm Kate Kite, Continuing Education Coordinator for Illinois Heartland Library System, and welcome to our third Thursday Continuing Education program. I want to thank Lincoln Library in Springfield for hosting our in-person portion. As you can probably tell, I am unable to be there in person today, so I am joining, like most of you, through Zoom. Just a couple of housekeeping things before I introduce our presenter this morning. Make sure you are muted and please turn off your camera. We do have the chat enabled, so please put any questions that you have in the chat, and that will be monitored. And then also, please rename yourself with either your first or last name or your first name and library name. So at 10, we have Laura Solomon presenting on the state of social media trends and challenges. At 11, we will switch over to our Members Matter meeting, where you'll hear updates from Share and IHLS staff. And then we invite your questions and comments as members. And so at that point, we invite you to unmute and turn on your camera. And so now I'm going to introduce our speaker today. We have Laura Solomon joining us. Laura Solomon is the Library Services Manager for the Ohio Public Library Information Network and a W3C certified front-end web developer. She has been doing web development and design for more than 20 years in both public libraries and as an independent consultant. She specializes in developing with Drupal and is a 2010 Library Journal mover and shaker. She's written several books about social media and web design specifically for libraries and speaks internationally on both these and other technology-related topics. As a former children's librarian, she enjoys bringing the fun of technology to audiences and in giving libraries the tools they need to better serve the virtual customer. So thank you for joining us this morning, Laura. I'm going to go ahead and mute and turn off my video and turn it over to you.
Thanks, Kate. Hi, everyone. I live in a kind of rural area, which I'm sure some of you can relate to. And it has been my experience that when I attempt to share out my screen like I am now and run video, things can get a little iffy. So I just wanted to pop in here with the camera on, prove that I'm not an AI. I do exist, but I am going to turn off the camera now. So thank you for your understanding, and we're going to go ahead and get started. If you have any comments or questions, please feel free to put those into the chat. Please do keep your mics muted. I will try to get to all the questions I can. I may have to wait until the end, but I will do my best depending on the level of engagement. But please feel free to put comments, questions, all that into the chat. I am trying to keep an eye on it as we go through this today. So here in a nutshell is what I'm going to be covering today, broken out into some very broad strokes. And so just to give you a little bit of a preview, there's the table of contents, so to speak. But before we even get underway, I want to give you a disclaimer. And I have done variations of this presentation over several years. In the past, it's been more about what kinds of content work best for libraries. And I wish I could say that this year's session was more of the same. But the truth is, we're not in an environment anymore that solidly supports that approach. We're watching traditional social media collapse in many ways in real time. So what I'm doing today is delving a little deeper into what that environment looks like right now and issues that libraries are going to have to contend with going forward. And so we're going to start with the rise of the algorithm. I'm sure that many of you are at least somewhat familiar with the idea of social media algorithms, but may not have understood just how deep that rabbit hole really goes. So let's start with what an algorithm really is. At its most basic level, it's a compilation of rules and information that makes decisions about what users allegedly want to see on a particular social media platform. And social media sites create unique algorithms for each person. So your algorithm is almost certainly different than someone else's. And not only are algorithms individual to a person, they're individual to a platform, which is one of the reasons why fine-tuning things for engagement and reach on various platforms is so different oftentimes, because you're catering to an individual algorithm for that platform. And then on top of that, the platform itself is creating individual algorithms for each person. So what worked for you, they're changing all the time, these algorithms. And for those of you who have your hands pretty deep into the pool of social media, this is probably not news to you, because you've had to change up what you've probably been doing from year to year. Trying to satisfy the algorithm or get your stuff even just seen gets to be kind of a full-time job sometimes. So in some sense, yes, algorithms are intended to filter through all of your potential content and give you, and again, allegedly, better experience. But I think most of us would probably argue at this point it's not really better. But giving users supposedly this better experience is only what we're seeing on the surface when we look at an algorithm. The reason that these services do this has a lot more to do with, no surprise, money. So algorithms, their main job is to keep you scrolling for longer, because the longer you stay on a platform, the more ads you're likely to see. And if you think you've been seeing more ads in your various feeds, you're not wrong. Social media's glory days as an online community, long gone. You probably already knew that, but I just wanted to point it out again. I have been talking about how Facebook became pay to play for more than a decade. I looked back, I've been talking about it with libraries at least since 2012, if not sooner. And even now, it's still a surprise, which is a surprise to me. But that's only gotten worse. So organic engagement on almost any social platform is really difficult, if not extremely rare to get. If you're not familiar with the term organic, basically it means you didn't pay for it. Somebody saw your stuff and you didn't have to pay for them to see it. Organic reach is, I don't want to say it's becoming an urban myth, but it's heading in that direction. By now, you probably do know that the people who actually follow your library are almost never going to see your content unless you're paying to promote it. And libraries generally don't have big bucks for ad spends and post boosting, but we keep posting anyway, right? This environment as a whole has been a red flag for library marketing for a long time, but we keep posting because it doesn't seem like there are a lot of options. And it's still, I think, for many of us, an expectation, something that libraries are supposed to do. And we're going to dive a little bit more into that later. So, what does the algorithm mean for us as libraries? And when I say the algorithm, I'm not just referring to one person's or one platform's, but just the idea of an algorithm. So, I think it means a couple of different things. First, I think it points to this: short form video is pretty much the star of social media these days. And when I say short form, we're talking about TikTok, we're talking about reels, we're talking about stories, any kind of video, usually in portrait mode that's very short, therefore the name short form video. It's no accident that you have seen short form video prioritized on nearly every one of the major platforms outside of TikTok, because they all want to be like TikTok. They all want that kind of success. The thing about TikTok, though, or even about short form video just in general, is that it's not for the faint of heart. Not to mention that TikTok in particular isn't even an option for some organizations. For example, I work for a state agency, the Ohio Public Library Information Network, here in Ohio. And as a state agency, we are not allowed to do anything with TikTok. I'm not allowed to have TikTok on my state-owned devices, which means I couldn't even work on creating a TikTok if I wanted to. So not even something that we can do. The other part of TikTok, aside from being focused entirely on short form video, is that Gen Z now uses TikTok for search. So in the past, when I would talk about trends, I would point to the fact, and this was a trend for a good number of years, that younger generations didn't use Google so much as they used YouTube when they were searching for something. And that is still something that's definitely happening. But what we're seeing now is a significant trend where we're seeing Gen Z move away even from YouTube, and now they're moving over to TikTok. Now, that doesn't mean they've stopped going to YouTube. But you probably, some of you already know Google isn't always the first choice when Gen Z is searching the internet. But again, they're moving from that longer form video to shorter form video. And so TikTok, in many ways, is for many of them becoming their default search engine. So one of the most important things marketers do now is they optimize their content specifically for TikTok. And for those of you who watch TikTok, and if you are like me, where you're completely addicted to TikTok and it eats way too many hours of my time, you probably are already aware of just how heavily geared everything is to the algorithm. It's essentially becoming search engine optimization. So marketers and content creators aren't really doing this for Google or YouTube. They're doing it for TikTok, and better optimization for TikTok means more visibility, which in most cases also means more money, not just more engagement. The thing also about TikTok is it's especially geared for professional content creators or businesses or people who want to be professional content creators. Again, if you are addicted to TikTok or even spend probably any more than a few minutes on TikTok, you've probably quickly realized that this is a significant business for not just mainstream businesses, but individual creators. The production values are significant. It is not like Facebook where anybody can post anything. Yes, anybody can post anything, but if you're not creating truly quality content with pretty good production values, your stuff isn't going to get seen. So that is an issue, right? Uh, in terms of libraries and what we have to be considering is this, you know, there all of these organizations, these businesses, people, individuals are becoming these serious content creators, and algorithms prioritize engagement almost across the board, not just TikTok. Success is dependent on creating more engaging, more interesting, better content. And the problem for many libraries is that they don't have a dedicated person. Even fewer have a dedicated team to doing this. I don't know of many libraries that can point to one person, say the only thing this person does is create social media content, especially short form video. Maybe very large metro public libraries or universities that can rely on student help, but for most of us, this isn't a model that most of us can sustain. Social media is most often either an afterthought or an add-on to the job duties of someone else. We all typically wear multiple hats when we work in a library. And so there's no easy fix for this. I don't want you to think that there is. And it's making it extremely difficult for libraries to compete for engagement on these platforms, not just TikTok. Okay, let's move on to talking about uh, Twitter/X. There's a lot that has been going on with this over the past year and a half or so. And of course, one of the most recent developments, and you know this already, is that it's not even called Twitter anymore. I have a really hard time not calling it Twitter. It's now called X. Let's talk about some of what's been happening and what this means. So Elon Musk, not a fan currently for various reasons, but one of the first things he did was that he upended traditional Twitter verification. He turned it into a pay for play system. So if you wanted a blue check mark saying you have a verified account, no longer did that check mark have anything to do with being authoritative at all. Now you could simply pay and you could get one. So that means there's a loss of credibility and visibility for accounts that are on there who are actually legit and were meaningful. Those blue check marks are no longer authoritative because anybody can just pay. It was like, I think when it started, it was like $8 a month. It may still be. Yeah, anybody pretty much can afford $8 a month and you get a blue check mark. So it's pretty much meaningless. In addition to that, Twitter has been plagued with technical issues because they had mass layoffs. They no longer have true content moderation. So all kinds of misinformation and hate speech runs rampant on this platform now. Um, People have also reported that the For You timeline is showing them content they're not interested in anymore. So even the algorithm isn't working properly. If you were a TweetDeck user, I was a heavy TweetDeck user. They discontinued that. That was not something they supported anymore. And I think for me, that was one of the last straws. I am no longer active on this platform. My agency is no longer active on this platform. Um, so all of these are just some of the ongoing issues and chaos that have occurred since that it was bought out by Elon Musk. So what this means is that people are leaving in droves. Anecdotally, I can tell you that very, very large numbers of the people that I have followed over the years, and I have been on Twitter/X at least since 2007, they have either deactivated their accounts or deleted their accounts entirely. And a result of these issues and many others, I mean, every day it feels like I'm looking at my news feeds that have to do with social media, and I'm seeing something new that's a problem that X is suddenly having or has created. More than 32 million users will probably have left Twitter entirely by the end of this year. To put that in perspective for you, at its height before Elon Musk bought it, the number of daily active users was 238. So Twitter/X is bleeding users at a significant rate. And so the outlook for retention, it's bleak, which of course is probably, I would say almost certainly, contributing to this kind of flailing and chaos that seems to be happening because they're trying to find something that works. And never mind that most of it worked before all of this, but they're just trying different things and generally not in a good way. But one of the things I think that gets overlooked in this ongoing collapse of this Twitter/X ecosystem is this. That's because Twitter was a major place for people to come together in community, and that is now essentially gone. And that has affected a very large number, if not all, of social movements and organizations that were using this platform to get their messages out. So imagine, for just some examples, imagine Arab Spring of 2011, or the Me Too movement, or Occupy Wall Street, or even here in Ohio, the Save Ohio Libraries campaign in 2009. All of these used Twitter as their central gathering point, or it was a central part of their strategy. And without Twitter, these social movements wouldn't have gained nearly as much traction because it was a place to amplify voices that previously went unheard. And the thing is, there is no good replacement. When Musk first took over, some organizers and activists and individuals, myself included, although not directly right after, we moved to platforms like Mastodon or Blue Sky, which was founded by Twitter co-founder Jack Dorsey. Neither appears to be fulfilling the same purpose that Twitter did once upon a time. And the fewer people are using them, which makes it more difficult to build that community that we were used to and expecting on Twitter. And don't get me wrong, these platforms are growing, but they're still far, far smaller, and their pace of growth after sort of that initial burst has been pretty low. So far, none of these have really been able to fill the same purpose that Twitter did for so long. Um, the numbers of these users on these alternatives, again, they are growing. I don't want you to think that they've completely stalled, but the rate at which they're growing, it's not the same. And it certainly is not a Twitter replacement. None of these are. Now, when Threads came along, I think it was last summer, people rushed by the millions to sign up for Threads. It seemed like it was this lifeboat for this dumpster fire that Twitter had become. But it was immediately problematic because, at least at the time, it required an Instagram account in order to sign up for Threads. So if you didn't have an Instagram account, you had to first get an Instagram account to get a Threads account. And for my own agency, this was an issue because we didn't have an Instagram account, believe it or not. We're a state agency. Frankly, we're tech, we're IT, that's what we do. And so, to be honest, we are just not a visually interesting bunch of people. We sit at keyboards all day. So creating primarily visual content was very difficult. And there was a reason why we had chosen not to get on Instagram. It was not a good fit for our organization. And we were then at that point, we had to make a decision. It's like, well, if this is going to have the most traction, Threads, that is, I guess we're going to have to get an Instagram account. So now we're forced to maintain two additional accounts, Threads and Instagram. In addition, Threads just as a whole doesn't solve the core problem of not being Twitter. It's not a centralized communication point. Twitter was one town square for one town. Not everyone in the world was on Twitter or used Twitter, but everyone knew what it was and what it was for. So the audiences now are very divided. Threads is maybe a bigger town square than many of the others that are kind of vying for this grouping of drowning Twitter users, but the audience is still pretty divided. And that presents a problem that isn't really manageable. That's not something that libraries or anyone else can fix. It's just the nature of the beast at this point. So now we're seeing things like this. Twitter is a shell of itself, a vestigial remain from a different period online, and its replacements are partial recreations. You do not need any of these sites. That piece about being partial recreations is really important, and it points to what I've been talking about. These aren't Twitter, and that's not going to change. But the most important piece of this, I think, is the last line: you do not need any of these sites. And that is I feel a really hard concept, I think, for libraries to grab onto because we have been tweeting for so long. It has been part of our social media strategies, and we've had Twitter yanked out from underneath us. But as uncomfortable as that is, I think this is an important idea that we need to consider, that we don't need Twitter or any of these other supposed replacements. So where does that leave us as libraries? And unfortunately, not anywhere specific, because I know people come to these and like, Laura, give us concretes, give us answers. You have to understand that there are no good answers. There are no good concrete things that I can tell you in this kind of environment. This is not just libraries struggling with these kinds of problems. This is literally everyone involved in creating social media. And I mean everyone. People at billion-dollar corporations have these same issues. This isn't something that libraries are going to solve. And so we're dealing with kind of more niche alternative like Mastodon, Blue Sky. We've got Threads, which is growing at a faster rate than either of those previously mentioned two. But again, not that central place. So libraries are going to need to focus on getting their message out in other ways that are not Twitter and not Twitter-like. And if you haven't already been convinced to have your library leave Twitter, and I realize I come across as very biased, but you have to understand that I am up to my ears in this research and this news all the time. I have had lots of reasons, but as a library, I think this is the most convincing reason to get yourself off of this platform. As libraries, we think a great deal about how our communities perceive us. It is something that is mission critical if you're in marketing. Do you want your organization to be associated with what Twitter/X is now? And I want you to think really hard about this. Libraries exist in part to help fight in misinformation, and Twitter/X is a known contributor to misinformation in a big way. This is not a small problem. And we're working really hard to put out this fire of misinformation, but Twitter is doing almost nothing to put that fire out. In fact, it's adding fuel. And it has all kinds of problematic content. And some people say, well, Laura, Twitter was always kind of a dumpster fire. depending on what filter bubble you were in, and that's not wrong. The problem is that it's not anywhere near as limited as it used to be. Remember, there's no real content moderation or stops happening at the Twitter end now. So you might think me very biased, and you're welcome to think that, but from a purely objective standpoint, I encourage you to think long and hard about how your library fits into this ecosystem. And really, in my opinion, it really shouldn't anymore. Okay, moving on. Let's talk about Gen Z and how they occupy or don't the social media space. So, for a long time, we've been told that to reach teens and young adults, we have to use social media to make genuine connections. And in order to do that, we need to provide authentic content. If you look back at my older books about social media, this is lesson number one, probably in nearly all of them. Uh, but even with doing those things, we're suddenly finding that that no longer works. We've been told that we need to use social media to be authentic, have an authentic voice. But we're suddenly finding that Gen Z isn't responding. And this is because social media is being redefined. One thing to understand is that no matter how quote unquote authentic your content is on these legacy platforms, and it's kind of weird to think that social media is less than two decades old, and we're referring to things like Facebook and even Instagram now almost as legacy platforms. Uh, Chances are good that Gen Z isn't even on that platform anymore to hear your message. And that's because young people have become increasingly disillusioned with the whole legacy experience of social media. Uh, Take a look, for example, at Instagram's pretty jumbled content feed and tons of ads, lots of unsolicited suggestions about other accounts to follow. You're seeing this also assuredly on Facebook, of course, both owned by the same company. Even other platforms, Pinterest, are following this model. Your feed is full of things that you didn't ask for. Uh, but Gen Z is a little different. We maybe have gotten used to it, but Gen Z they're looking at this scenario and these environments and they're going, nah, we don't need that. We're out. Even with Twitter, before Elon Musk bought it, they were looking at Twitter and just thinking it was a bunch of old people, especially people who were arguing and very divisive. And Gen Z isn't really about that, props to them. So they weren't particularly interested in Twitter even then. And then across all the platforms, you're seeing constant changing of features as all of these social media companies are scrambling to try to figure out what works for these younger folks. And none of these platforms are prioritizing user experience, right? They're all about selling ads and getting you to do things their way. This is not about you. It hasn't been about us for a long time. And Gen Z, out of all the generations to date, has really taken a look at this whole environment and understood that it wasn't for them. And they're not willing to put up with it. So this is not an environment, in short, that they want to be in. And many experts believe that the original power and idea of social media platforms, which is to stay connected with your friends, has been lost on these legacy platforms. And I'm not sure they're wrong. I have frequently said at this point in my life, if I did not have to be, for example, on Facebook individually, I would not be. But it's become such an integral part of the infrastructure of my life and where all my connections are that I feel trapped, but I don't enjoy it. I haven't enjoyed it for a long time. Generation Z is really kind of spearheading this change. Even just a couple years ago, Gen Z social media usage fell across every major app except TikTok. And most of us remember a time when teens were on Facebook, and that was a big deal. And then, of course, all the olds came. We came over, and they all left, and they fled to other platforms. But now they don't even want to be part of those platforms. And this is because we're seeing a new type of platform start to gain, and I shouldn't even say start to gain, it's been gaining traction for some time, but it's been doing it pretty close to the surface, but still under the radar. Is that a good analogy? Um, so the reason for this is that Gen Z wants true connections with the people that they are choosing to interact with. So this is why we're seeing huge usage increases in apps like Snap and WhatsApp and Discord. Um, Discord now has more than 140 million users. Even for those of you who have heard of Discord, you may have not have realized just how huge it's gotten, especially with Gen Z. And it's not just about gaming, by the way. There are several library Discord channels that are, again, library related, not gaming. My son, who is in college now, has used Discord to communicate with friends for several years. It's not even necessarily about gaming. It's just another communication channel where he and his friends can talk, and not everybody can shove their way in there. So, what we're seeing now, we've actually been seeing for the past several years. We've been seeing the rise of something that experts call a digital campfire. Being yourself is really compelling, and making real friends as opposed to, Facebook friends is kind of a selling point. And that's one of the main reasons that Gen Z isn't into legacy social media. My son, he has an Instagram account purely for consumption purposes, just to keep up with his friends in case they're posting anything. He doesn't post at all. But Gen Z wants connections that most closely resemble their real life connections. Even places like Fortnite and Roblox are digital campfires. They're places where small groups of people get together because they have similar interests. And maybe some of you can speak to this also if you are on a Discord channel, or you have a group chat on Snapchat or something. People, Gen Z teens, Gen Z young adults, they want to connect with people they want to connect with, not just because those people happen to be on the same platform. They want to talk to their friends, and only their friends. I don't think that's an unreasonable expectation. And maybe, Facebook and Instagram and these other platforms, that's what they started out as, but certainly that's not what they are now. Another thing that we're seeing, in addition to this move to digital campfires, is kind of a subset called micro community campfires, which are small niche communities that revolve around shared interests. Even TikTok comes under this heading because it houses so many of these. If you've ever heard of book talk, for instance, or heard someone say, I ended up on the wrong side of TikTok, there's specific little um, kind of interest aligned communities. Book Talk is one of the most well known ones. I know some libraries have caught on to the fact that if they create displays around what Book Talk is talking about, they tend to get pretty good circ on those, from what I understand. So in many cases, algorithms direct you to specific micro communities or campfires based on your preference. As soon as I liked one thing about books on TikTok, TikTok very quickly got the message like, oh, you want to be on Book Talk. And so now I see tons of things. I liked one TikTok about ACOTAR, A Court of Thorns and Roses, and now I feel some days that's all I see. Thanks, algorithm. But that's what a micro community campfire is. It's that smaller place where people with their interests align. And so maybe a little different than specific campfires of friends, but it points to this idea that you only want to be involved with that community and not be recommended all these other things necessarily, depending on the platform. So the whole idea is that they're getting something that is probably in most cases more private. In traditional social media, it's harder to be yourself. But on other places like WhatsApp, you don't have to have a curated identity. That's exhausting. It's been exhausting. And making connections that more closely resemble in real life connections, they operate in the same way. That's what they're after. And personally, I think that's a great way to go. Like I said, if I could move to that model at this point in my life, I probably would do it, but I don't have that option. One marketer compared all of this to being in a digital airport, and nobody wants to hang out in the digital airport. Those of us stuck in Facebook and Instagram and some of these other platforms, we're in this digital airport, and most of us started out at least wanting to be there. Gen Z doesn't want to be in the digital airport. I'm not sure I can blame them. They want someplace where not just anybody can talk to anybody. They want to be with the people that they know. Oop, I just went the wrong way. And I did it twice. Come on. I'll get there, I promise. There we go. Okay. So all of this in short, too long didn't read. Young people are folding up their social media tents and they are barricading themselves in places where we can't go. And this is not something that marketers in general, not again, not just library, none of this is limited to just libraries. This is a problem for everyone and everything. And this has some implications. It's almost impossible for us to show up in an authentic way because it's kind of like barging into someone's house. You can't do that. You shouldn't do that. And so also social listening. If people are talking about us, we're not going to be there to hear it. Gen Z is not a demographic of passive consumers. They are scrolling, yes, probably, but they're much more interested in typically more specific things. They don't want to be on some of these platforms. And what that means is that if they're not on these traditional, again, feels kind of weird to call these platforms that, but if they're not on traditional platforms, then we can't reach them traditionally. That is not going to be an effective strategy because they're not there. So the ones, organizations, brands that are currently successful basically are reverse engineering their offerings for what their communities want. So, for example, creating content specifically for the TikTok algorithm, showing up on pretty much any social media platform these days and saying, hey, we have a cool teen program. That hasn't worked for ages. If that's what you've been doing, just you're wasting your time. Please stop because nobody cares. That hasn't been how people want content for a long time. But now we're seeing that refined even more in the sense that people are really, again, playing to that algorithm, which is so mission critical now. Again, not just TikTok, but that algorithms affect every social media platform. So building community is something that we have to be looking at, but we may or may not be able to do it in this space anymore. And that's something that we need to be seriously thinking about. This is not an easy or a comfortable situation for libraries. We often don't have the resources, staff time, expertise, yeah, money to do this kind of marketing consistently. So in some ways, libraries are now being effectively priced out of the market. Again, not just money, staff expertise, staff resources, staff time. Being effective online means being a good content creator, and that doesn't lend itself to how libraries usually operate or the resources that we have. There are some libraries that are making it in the space, like on TikTok, always kind of my top example there, but they are the exception. If you look at just the views, you will quickly see many libraries aren't making it on TikTok, and you already have heard me talk about why. Make no mistake, by the way, this is a new model. This is not a trend, although the name of my session is Trends. The trend I'm talking about here is the advent of a new model. I have been saying for a while that what we are essentially seeing is the death of traditional social media. And so let's talk about where social media is right now as a whole. So this is one of my favorite acronyms. There ain't no such thing as a free lunch, usually attributed to science fiction author Robert A. Heinlein. I use it here because this is a trend that has been creeping up on us, again, marketing in general, not just libraries, for over a decade. But social media companies have done it, I think, incrementally and in a way that wasn't immediately apparent. It's only now that it's becoming, I think, a much more noticeable uh, factor in how it operates. Remember, I mentioned that I've been talking about Facebook as a pay to play environment since at least 2012. Um, Even back then, I was telling libraries that they weren't already boosting their content, paying to have their content shown. They weren't really getting stuff seen, even if people had opted in to see that. So that was more than a decade ago. And things not only haven't changed, the whole model has become much more firmly entrenched. By now, this idea really isn't new for anyone, I think, but it's hard to believe that people used to wonder how Facebook made money. Well, we all know now it's ads. Facebook was not only making money off of showing users traditional ads, but by charging everyone to show their content. And now we understand that advertising is the lifeblood of all the social networks, not just Facebook. But there's a big difference that's been coming our way, and it's coming pretty fast. For years, we've perhaps become used to this whole idea of pay to play, and we know our content isn't really getting views without ponying up some money. Some of us may also be aware that the prices, by the way, have risen a lot for that privilege, but that's not the change that I'm referring to. Remember the old adage, if the product is free, you are the product? That is no longer true. Now we are also becoming the product. For years, the money involved with social media was on the part of those who wanted more reach for their content. Again, we were paying for ads, we were paying to boost our content, et cetera, et cetera. Um, but social media platforms figured out how to monetize their services even further, because this is how we as content consumers have paid for social media, is with our eyeballs. And now social media companies want our money too, not just money on the part of people putting out the content. I think that the first time many of us started to really become cognizant of this kind of thing was with Twitter Blue. Remember, I was telling you that Twitter, after Musk took over, immediately made that blue check mark, the verification, pay to play. That was Twitter Blue. And a whole bunch of problems arose from that model. Of course, we already discussed that. But this is happening with all of the platforms, all the legacy platforms. You've probably already noticed that with many platforms now, you get offers to like up your experience, level up your experience, just pay a little bit more. Now you can get verified. Now you get some additional perks. Now you don't see the ads. All of these are ways to monetize your user experience from your end as the user rather than the content creator. And so we're starting to see this and realize we're getting shafted at both ends. This is another reason, by the way, that the whole legacy experience is not appealing to Gen Z. I know it certainly isn't appealing to me. So we're seeing quotes like this now: security and support is now a luxury, not a given. We're paying for things that maybe in the past we got for free, which is probably not a huge surprise, I think, for many of us. But what we maybe weren't prepared for is sort of the speed at which this is now coming. And this is now something that virtually all the platforms are doing in some way. I guarantee you it's there. So all of this should really be prompting us to think hard about what libraries are really getting out of social media, because calculating uh, return on investment, involvement in social media has always been problematic. And that problem, again, I've said this several times and I will keep saying it to make sure that we all kind of set our expectations. This is not unique to libraries. I suspect that the answer for many of us as libraries going forward, it might be something like, yeah, we're still doing this and I guess we're going to pay, but we're going to be upset about it in perpetuity. And I don't think you're wrong for being upset in perpetuity. Obviously, I still am. I'm talking about it so people understand this environment. It's frustrating. If for no other reason, if you're in marketing or social media promotion at your library, you've probably already been frustrated. I would be shocked if you weren't. I don't think anybody can blame us for being upset, but what we or anyone else thinks about this whole environmental thing and the trends and all of this is going to be irrelevant. Of course, these companies don't care about us. They never have. I've never made a secret of thinking that. I think we've got some pondering and some calculations that we need to do about whether or not being heavily involved in social media, and the heavily, of course, is maybe a relative term, whether that's going to be worth it for us, especially libraries maybe that don't have the resources to participate in this environment the way that it is now becoming and moving. So that leads to this question, right? Is it still relevant? So I'm going to give you the spoiler alert. Yes, it's still relevant, but you probably thought that was coming too. There's a whole bunch of caveats coming on. So does social media marketing still matter? Yes. I don't want anybody to think that this is Laura dissing social media. Remember, I've spent most of my professional career involved in social media, writing about social media. It is still relevant, but it's relevant, I think, in a way now that is much different than we've been used to and that how we have thought about it. I think that the essential nature of social media marketing has changed, and it's probably forever. That's typically how things work. Things change, go away. And so it's different. And what that means is, again, we have to look really closely at our resources, our time, our expertise, our money. Those are the three big ones, right? And decide whether or not we stay in this environment. And a short answer is Laura thinks you should stay, but again, caveats, but understand that this can't be the end all be all. You can't just market to people. You can't just promote things to people. I have been saying that since 2010 when I wrote my first book about social media. That is not new. But perhaps the part that is newer is that we have to understand that social media is only part of the marketing process. It can't be that the only thing a library does is put stuff up on Facebook, especially if you're not even paying. But even if you are, that can't be your entire social strategy. That isn't going to work anymore if it ever worked at all. Um, I think we have to understand that this is just a piece of a library strategy, more so perhaps than it ever has been. This is one of the main reasons that subscribers to a library's digital newsletter, for example, are much more powerful from a marketing perspective, or people that subscribe to a podcast. These people are opting into your content. It's not just popping up. Remember, the newest generation, well, they're not even the newest generation because Generation Alpha is the newest generation. But for Generation Z, they're not passive content consumers. They're going to, again, get with the people they want to get with. They are going to subscribe to the things they want to. I think that's still true for a lot of the older generations, especially if they have the option to get what they want when they want it. Everybody likes that. So one of the things that I would tell you, and other library marketing experts will tell you, if you're familiar with Angela Hirsch from Super Library Marketing, she does fabulous stuff. One of the things she's been saying for quite a while is libraries need to stop leaning so heavily into social media and start focusing on these opt-in environments. And the most common example she'll use, and I think for good reason, is subscriptions to a library's newsletter. Usually digital. That's an opt-in channel. We want people to have the ability to connect with us, and we want to be able to say, "Yep, that's a connection. They didn't just actually accidentally stumble onto our stuff." Shouting things out with a megaphone hasn't worked for a long time. It certainly doesn't work now. So being passive, that we as libraries, we have to recognize that social media is part of a process. It can't just be passive, putting stuff up on a social media wall and hoping that people see it now. We're going to need to focus on these other kinds of channels, and not just digital newsletters. Your marketing, if you have a department or a person, they probably have other ways that they are marketing, and those are the things you probably need to be focusing on. So keep in mind that also those kinds of opt-in channels can't be easily disrupted by, say, the failure of someone else's platform, Twitter/X. Of course, we're looking at you, but we also know that significant changes to algorithms and user interface and all these things can also affect user experience, and people don't like it. When someone is opting into your newsletter or your podcast, that is much less likely to have that kind of disruption. So jumping to other ships, that was something I saw libraries doing when Twitter sort of started going under. It's an understandable reaction to be like, okay, where do we go now? Well, maybe we don't go anywhere. Maybe that's the answer. So I want you, if nothing else, after today, to start thinking very differently about how social media marketing works, or maybe now doesn't. It's very different than the world that maybe this all started out as being maybe around 15 years ago. The world was different then, and you could attract attention just by having an interesting social media account. It was something that was a novelty, authentic content. That doesn't really matter anymore in really significant ways, I think, for library. So you're going to need to give this some thought, and nobody likes to hear that. As I said at the very beginning of this presentation today, I didn't have good news. I don't have this kind of content is going to work. This kind of strategy is going to work. My focus today is making sure everybody understands that the world has changed. And so how we do marketing has to change also. Nobody likes this news. And so I know that because I'm as frustrated as everyone else. But I hope that this has given you some food for thought, if nothing else, so we can all start thinking a little differently about social media and libraries and marketing. So, having said all of that, and you're probably sad now, if not outright angry, I'm happy to take questions or thoughts or comments. And I'm keeping an eye on the chat. So, and Kate, if I miss anything, please let me know. But I'm going to hope that folks are putting things into the chat or however else we're accepting questions.
Yeah, I don't have any questions that have come through. So now is a perfect time if you've been holding on to a question. I do see that there's a question, will the slides be available for reference? And yes, correct, Laura, we will send out the recording and the slides to people who have registered.
Okay, yes, I can send you the slides. And while people are thinking, one of the things I like to do is I like to ask people at least one question during the kind of the end part of all of this, because I'm always intrigued to know, of all the things that I covered, what was the thing that made you go, aha, or I didn't know that, or that's scary. So, what was the thing that kind of hit you right between the eyes and made you think about something you need to go do or not do or change? Do me a favor, please, since I've just talked at you for about 45 minutes, or probably, I guess, more at this point. If you would put that into the chat, I would really appreciate it because I really like knowing what things affect people when I talk about this kind of thing. And Joel says permission to ditch Twitter and shouting to the void style posts was very freeing. Yes, it is. Thank you. Leah says Gen Z's preference for smaller, closer groups of friends reminds me of a digital version of doing D&D in parents' basements. Yes, I don't think that's a wrong uh, association. Deb says shocked that the platforms are not being used as much. And Deb, I should say that it's somewhat age dependent. When I'm talking about Gen Z, for sure, legacy social media is not where they're at. Um, Older generations, Gen X and above, you're probably still seeing some significant use, but you shouldn't count on it. I think that's an important thing to know. John says the fact that platforms have been so starkly divided by age. And it's not, you're right, John, it's not just the platforms, it's the whole model. Remember, the Gen Z and younger, they're not interested in the older model of social media. Cami says, I didn't realize that even if I post something, my subscribers may not be seeing the content. Cam, you'll be lucky if any of your subscribers are seeing the content. I'm sorry, that's just kind of how it's been for a while. If you're not putting money behind it, and that's getting to be a much more expensive proposition. Penny says, I liked hearing using the term digital campfires, and we'll use this with my junior high and high school students. Good. Yes, I didn't make that up, by the way. That's what current experts are calling this new model, newer, I should say. I have at very least been writing about digital campfires since 2018, and I can tell you that I didn't make it up even then. So they've been around for a while. So let's see. Carrie says, have you seen any libraries start rewards programs like larger businesses to help counteract the pay-to-play social media environment? I have not, Carrie, but I have to say, I do wonder if it's worth the time or the effort to do that. I think, again, it's going to depend on what age demographic you're trying to reach. Older demographics, maybe that would be an interesting idea. But again, you have to kind of balance, your time, your resources, and how much, could you be putting that into a more effective channel? It's just something to think about. Brandy says, I am in my early 40s, but I relate to Gen Z's preference to only engage with who I choose. I am not in my early 40s anymore, Brandy. I am very solidly on the earlier end of Gen X, and that's all I'm going to say. And I have a lot more preference for the way Gen Z goes with a lot of things. Um, Leah, this is the question everybody asks, and nobody has a good answer. Leah says, how do you recommend we advertise events to teens? So here's the thing, Leah. When it comes to social media, they don't want your stuff. That is not new, by the way. I've also been talking about that since at least 2012. They don't want to be advertised to. That's rule number one. And so you have to find other ways to reach them. And that is really hard. And you're right, it's going to be word of mouth. It's going to be through your local schools. It's not going to be by posting anything to social media. And remember, with the digital campfire model, which most, if not a lot of them have moved to, that's that you can't go there. This is why marketing folks all over, not just libraries, are having panic attacks because they're not looking at our stuff and they don't want to be anywhere near their stuff, and we can't go near their stuff. Ashley says genuine connection makes sense when you think about how popular Michael Threets is. Yes, and remember where Michael started? He started on TikTok. That's where he gained most of his following. Some of it I know is on Instagram, at least now, but that's where he started, was TikTok. Leah says from Gwen, I am strongly considering disabling the chat feature on Facebook. It causes too many issues. What is your opinion? Um, that's a good question. I'm not sure I have a good answer for that. I would say if it's at the very least, though, if it's really taking up too much of your staff resources to make it happen, the comment section. Okay, not the same as chat. Don't turn off your comments. That's considered really poor practice. I hate to say that because I know that they can be problematic. I actually do a whole session on negative feedback and trolls. But turning off comments is worse because then you truly have become nothing but a marketing channel, and nobody wants that. If you're not allowing people to engage, you have essentially made social media irrelevant. So again, you have to kind of weigh how much is it worth it to be on Facebook. But here's where I kind of deviate from that. Facebook is one of the channels that's kind of hard to get away from. It's easier to justify not being on something like X. It is harder to justify not being on Facebook. So that there's other ways to manage that, I think. But at the very least, I would say don't turn off your comments. I think that's a problem. But it's a good question, and I get why you would ask it. Kate, is that all we've got?
Yeah, that is all that I am seeing, which we are perfect on time. We are like right on time. So if anybody's got any last questions, get them in quickly. And I want to thank Laura again for presenting to us today. That was very enlightening.
You're very welcome. Yeah, I wish I had better answers, but this is where we're at right now. But I appreciate everybody listening to this. Oh, and Carrie's got a great link in there. I actually do another session on social media policies. There's so much involved in this that it can be really hard to keep up. And certainly I can't fit all of it into an hour, but thank you for that resource, Carrie.
Okay, thank you again, Laura. Thank you so much for presenting to us today. And as I said, everyone who registered will be getting a link to the recording and the slides that. So I'm going to go ahead and call it for our third Thursday continuing education program, and we are going to reset. And here in a couple minutes at 11, we will start back up with our Members Matter program.